The torpedo that shouldn't have been fired. August 15th, 1942. 0304 hours. South Pacific, 280 miles northeast of Espiritu Santo. The night is a black, endless sheet. No stars, no moon. Only the low, restless churn of the ocean. Inside the steel belly of the Japanese submarine I-19, humidity clings to every surface. Diesel fumes and sweat fill the narrow passages, mixing into a thick, metallic haze. Lieutenant Commander Takakazu Kanashi stands hunched beside the periscope column, headphones pressed to his ears. The submarine creaks slightly as it tilts in the current. Behind him, crewmen in white headbands sit tense at their stations, their faces illuminated by the faint blue glow of instrument dials. Bearing 170. Range 9,000 meters, whispers the sonar operator, eyes locked on his oscilloscope. Kanashi lowers the headphones and grips the periscope handles. The cold metal burns his palms. He raises the scope slowly, just enough to break the ocean's surface. The lens slices upward through a thin skin of seawater. And then, a shape forms in the darkness. Huge, angular, American. Her bow cuts the waves with the unmistakable silhouette of a Wasp-class aircraft carrier. Kanashi exhales through clenched teeth. Target identified, he whispers. USS Wasp. Behind him, the torpedo room crew stiffens. The carrier is perfectly broadside, moving at a steady, predictable speed. A firing solution so clean it almost feels wrong. Too easy. Too perfect. Kanashi adjusts focus. More silhouettes emerge, screening destroyers, and behind them, another large hull. A cruiser. A whole task group. He lowers the periscope slightly. Prepare tubes 1 through 6. Flooding forward tubes 1 through 6. The sub vibrates as seawater rushes into the torpedo chambers. The torpedo officer checks the gyro settings, wiping sweat from his forehead. Kanashi breathes slowly. His heart thumps in the center of his chest, steady, controlled. He knows what this strike means. Japan is being squeezed at Guadalcanal. Supplies are dwindling. American reinforcements arrive faster every week. Sank ships, and the island starves. Miss, and the U.S. Pacific Fleet grows stronger. One shot, one chance. He raises the periscope a final time. The USS Wasp glides serenely through the night, deck lights faintly glowing. Sailors walk between parked aircraft, unaware that death is already locked onto them from beneath the waves. Kanashi lowers the scope. Fire. The submarine lurches as 3 Type 95 oxygen torpedoes launch into the darkness. Fire's second spread. Another 3 torpedoes leap from the tubes. 6 weapons, deadly, silent wakes cutting toward the carrier group. Inside the sub, men grip handrails and braces. Sweat drips. No one speaks. Down periscope. Dive to 90 meters. The I-19 tilts sharply as ballast tanks fill. Bulkheads groan. The sub vanishes beneath the black Pacific. Seconds pass. Then minutes. The tension becomes suffocating. And then, a distant, muffled boom vibrates through the hull. Then another. And another. Kanashi closes his eyes. He doesn't smile. Commanders do not smile at moments like these. But he knows. Hit. One torpedo has struck something enormous. And in that moment, beneath hundreds of feet of water, with steam gauges rattling from distant concussions, the fate of America's entire Pacific coastline begins to shift. Because one torpedo strike tonight will not only cripple a carrier, it will change everything the United States believes about submarine warfare, homeland security, and the vulnerability of a coast that once thought itself untouchable. This is where it begins. The shockwave rolls through the submarine again, distant but unmistakable. Kanashi grips a steel handrail as the vibrations fade. In the darkness around him, his crew waits, and the ocean holds its breath. The day the Pacific caught fire. The shockwaves from the torpedo hits had barely faded through the hull of I-19 when the surface above descended into chaos. August 15th, 1942, 110 seconds after impact. Aboard USS Wasp. The first explosion erupts beneath the carrier's fuel storage. A violent, ripping blast that sends a column of flame shooting through the ship's hangar deck. Aviation machinist Mate Charles Wood is thrown off his feet, landing hard against a bulkhead as alarm klaxons shriek through the passageways. Fire! Fire on the hangar deck! All hands! Damage control stations! He staggers to his feet, ears ringing. Smoke barrels down the corridor like a living thing. The metallic taste of burning aviation fuel floods his mouth. Someone grabs his shoulder. A young seaman from Georgia, wide-eyed, bleeding from the temple. "What hit us?" the boy shouts. Wood doesn't know. Nobody knows. All they hear is chaos, roaring flames, ammunition cooking off, the thunder of secondary explosions as parked aircraft ignite. The carrier tilts slightly to port. Above decks, the fire is apocalyptic. Rows of dauntless dive bombers melt where they stand. Hot metal drips through steel grating. Ordnance begins exploding, small pops at first, then earth-shaking thuds. Fire suppression crews rush into the inferno, hauling hoses that hiss steam the moment water hits burning fuel. Lieutenant Commander Howard H. Avery, the ship's damage control officer, races across the hangar deck, heat so intense it blisters his cheeks. He tries to shout orders, but the noise is overwhelming. Sparks rain from the overhead. A parked Wildcat fighter erupts like a grenade, sending shrapnel careening down the length of the deck. Avery grabs a sailor, trying to drag a hose solo. "Get below. Shut the fuel lines. Now!" They sprint through the choking smoke. But Avery already knows. This ship is dying. One torpedo. That's all it took. One perfect strike in the worst possible place. Below the hangar, in the bowels of the ship, fuel lines rupture. Aviation gasoline spills into compartments and bilges. Fans that should have sucked vapor out instead ignite it, sending shockwaves through entire decks. The Wasp begins to burn from the inside out. 7 miles away, the torpedoes that missed Wasp continue traveling. One slams into the destroyer USS O'Brien, ripping a hole in her bow. Another strikes the USS North Carolina, one of the most powerful battleships afloat. 3 American warships damaged in a single spread. When the smoke finally clears hours later, the Pacific Fleet is bruised, bleeding, and stunned. But the consequences reach much farther than the burning decks of a carrier. 2 weeks later, Washington, D.C., Office of Naval Intelligence. A projector hums in a darkened briefing room. Black and white footage of burning carriers flickers on the wall. Wasp engulfed, planes exploding, sailors leaping into the sea. Rear Admiral Roland Smoot stands with his arms folded, jaw clenched tight. He turns to the officers gathered around the table. "Gentlemen," he says, voice grim, "a single Japanese submarine nearly wiped out an entire task group. They hit Wasp, O'Brien, and North Carolina in under 2 minutes." A silence falls over the room. Smoot continues, "If they could do that out there, they could do it off our coast." A murmur ripples through the officers. The Admiral steps closer to the screen. "Our West Coast defense plan is outdated. Radar coverage is thin. Coastal patrols are slow. Merchant convoys are unprotected. And Japanese long-range subs have already demonstrated their reach." He clicks to the next slide. A map appears. The western United States outlined with thin, vulnerable lines. No one in the room argues. No one dares. Because the truth is impossible to ignore. Japan's submarines can strike anywhere. And America's west coast is almost defenseless. The sinking of the Wasp is not just a naval tragedy. It's a warning shot, fired from hundreds of miles away, aimed straight at America's home front. And in the weeks to come, that warning will trigger the largest, fastest coastal defense transformation in U.S. history. A change sparked by one torpedo from one submarine commander on one quiet morning in the Pacific. The West Coast wakes up. September 1942. Off the coast of Oregon. Night. A thin fog hangs over the water like smoke over a battlefield. The Japanese submarine I-25, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Tegumi Meiji, slices silently through the dark Pacific swells. Its engines hum low, barely audible under the crash of waves. Tegami raises his binoculars. There, just faintly, a shadowed silhouette against the horizon. A lighthouse. America's mainland. He lowers the binoculars slowly. This isn't a battle. This is a message. He gives the order. A single torpedo is loaded into the forward tube, its metal frame slick with condensation, its nose painted with the Imperial Navy's dull gray. Crewmen move with precision, their faces lit only by red lamps. Stand by. Flood the tube. Fire. The submarine shudders. The torpedo streaks away. A mechanical predator gliding through silent black water. Minutes pass. Then a deep, rolling explosion rips across the coastline. The first foreign explosive to strike American mainland waters since the 19th century. Tegami does not cheer. He only nods once, a solemn acknowledgement of a strike not meant to destroy, but to prove a point. Japan could reach America, and they did. Hours later, U.S. Navy Yard, Astoria, Oregon. Searchlights sweep the waves. Patrol boats slash through the surf. Shore installations buzz with frantic radio chatter. Lieutenant Commander Robert Sinclair, head of coastal operations in the region, stands on a pier with his coat whipping in the cold wind. The blast had been distant, but unmistakable. A young ensign jogs up, breathless. "Sir, seismic sensors confirm it. Underwater detonation offshore. Likely a torpedo." Sinclair grits his teeth. "Any ships hit?" "No, sir. Just open water." Sinclair looks out at the dark horizon. "Then it wasn't an attack," he mutters. "It was a signal." 2 weeks later, another signal. 25 surfaces again, this time off Crescent City, California. Before dawn, it shells the shoreline with its 5.5-inch deck gun. Flashes of fire illuminating the conifer forests as shells slam into the earth. They don't cause major damage, but that doesn't matter. America hears the message loud and clear. The Pacific is not a moat. It's an open door. San Francisco, U.S. Navy Western Sea Frontier Headquarters. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher stands over a massive chart table, hands gripping its edges. His officers surround him, faces tense. 3 markers stand out. USS Wasp, sunk USS O'Brien, fatally damaged USS Indianapolis, torpedoed earlier that summer coastal waters, shelled Oregon and California, threatened. Fletcher taps the map with a knuckle. "Gentlemen," he says, voice low and steely, "we're done reacting. We start preparing." He begins issuing orders like artillery fire. Expand radar coverage from San Diego to Seattle. Increase PBY Catalina patrol flights along all commercial routes. Every merchant ship over 5,000 tons gets convoy protection. No exceptions. Deploy subchasers, destroyers, and armed trawlers across all coastal lanes. And put the Civil Defense Warning Network on round-the-clock alert. A lieutenant asks, "Sir, do we have ships for that?" Fletcher looks up slowly. "No, but we will, because we have no choice." Weeks later, the transformation is immediate. Fishing boats are fitted with depth charge racks. Yard patrol, craft patrol, the harbors at midnight. Army radar stations spring up along beaches once filled with picnickers and tourists. Observation blimps float above the coastline like silent gray guardians. Even Hollywood studios turn off their lights during air raid drills. Every night, West Coast cities dim. Every morning, more Navy ships sweep the horizon. Because one fact becomes undeniable. If a single Japanese submarine could change the course of a battle, it could also change the course of a nation's defenses. And it just had. From Seattle to San Diego, the West Coast becomes something it has never been before. A front line. But the story isn't over. Because even after the coastal attacks, Japan's submarines return, deadly, determined, and increasingly bold. And one particularly infamous attack would trigger the final, irreversible shift in America's defensive mindset. The torpedoing of USS Indianapolis. The torpedo that broke the illusion. July 30th, 1945. Philippine Sea. Night. Pitch black. A calm, starless void. The heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis, CA-35, cuts through the water at 17 knots, her steel hull gliding silently in the warm Pacific. The ship carries 1,196 sailors, exhausted, sunburned, but proud. They have just delivered the components of the Little Boy atomic bomb to Tinian. Their mission had been so secret, even their escort had been denied. On the bridge, Captain Charles Butler McVeigh, 3, stands with one hand on the railing, scanning the horizon. Nothing but darkness. An ocean so vast and quiet it almost feels safe. Almost. McVeigh turns to the officer of the deck. Maintain course. We'll be through this sector by dawn. The OD nods. No radar contact. No intelligence warning. No reason to believe anything lurks beneath the surface. But something does. Below the waves. Commander Hashimoto Makitsura of the Japanese submarine I-58 stands in the cramped command room, illuminated by red lamps. He wipes the humidity from his brow, listening to the sonar pings echoing through the hull. Then a cry. Bearing 350. Large contact. Hashimoto steadies himself. Range. Close, sir. Very close. A silent moment stretches between the men. Hashimoto raises binoculars to the periscope. And there it is. The dark outline of a massive cruiser, shimmering faintly against the Black Sea. A perfect target. He whispers. Fire 1. Fire 2. Two Type 95 oxygen torpedoes leap from the sub's forward tubes, slicing into the night. Hashimoto watches, breath still, until Tum! A geyser of flame erupts from the Indianapolis's starboard side. Seconds later, Tum! The second torpedo slams into the bow. The cruiser shudders violently. A column of fire and debris punches into the sky. Hashimoto lowers the periscope. It is done, he murmurs. On the Indianapolis. Chaos. Bulkheads collapse. Electrical systems spark. Water floods and roaring waves. Lieutenant Commander Joe Mahoney sprints down a corridor knee-deep in seawater, shouting, Move! Move! Get topside! Sailors claw their way up ladders, slipping, screaming, hauling each other through rising water. McVeigh grips the rail as the ship lists sharply. Send the distress signal, he orders. But it's already too late. The radios are gone. The sea is coming for them. Within 12 minutes, the proud cruiser rolls, groans, and slips beneath the waves, taking hundreds of men down with her. Hundreds more spill into the Pacific, clinging to life vests, debris, and each other. The night swallows their cries. Hours later, on the West Coast, communication centers buzz with routine traffic. No one knows the Indianapolis is gone. No distress signal sent. No escort to report her missing. No radar nets positioned to track her route. A single torpedo had struck, and America didn't even realize it yet. 3 days pass. 3 days of sharks, thirst, hallucinations, drowning, sun exposure, madness. When Navy pilot Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn finally spots the survivors by accident, by sheer fluke, he radios back. Large group of men in the water. The West Coast Command receives the news with stunned disbelief. What men? What ship? Silence hangs in the operations room. Someone whispers, Dear God, not the Indianapolis. The magnitude of the disaster becomes clear within hours. No convoy escort, no radar coverage along her path, no aircraft patrols, no arrival check-in system, no communication between bases, no anti-submarine umbrella at all. The U.S. Navy had left one of its most important cruisers sailing blind through a submarine hunting ground. And Japan had exploited the weakness perfectly. The reaction inside Western Sea Frontier Headquarters is volcanic. Admiral Fletcher slams a fist onto the table. No more. Not again. Never again. He orders a complete overhaul of route reporting procedures, mandatory escort requirements for high-value vessels, continuous patrol aircraft coverage across the Pacific transit lanes, full radar and sonar net installations along the coastal approaches, creation of the Transit Control Division, America's Atlantic-style convoy system for the Pacific. One torpedo had done what years of debate could not. It forced America to fortify the entire West Coast. And the reforms were only just beginning. Because if Japan could hit the mainland, and strike down a cruiser in open ocean. What else could they do? The U.S. was about to find out. The wake of fear, Japan's expanding reach. August 1942, Northern California coast. The surf pounds against the rugged cliffs near Trinidad Head as fog curls between the rocks like drifting smoke. The night sky is a muted gray, thick with the scent of salt and cold Pacific wind. Somewhere offshore, beneath the churning waves, steel moves silently through the dark. The Japanese submarine I-25. Her commander, Meiji Tegami, studies the coastline through a raised periscope. The faint, ghostly outline of the American shore wavers in the lens. Jagged cliffs, lonely forests, patches of moonlit surf. Tegami lowers the scope and turns to his torpedo officer. Prepare to surface. Within minutes, the sub breaks through the water, hissing as the conning tower rises into the fog. The crew climbs onto the deck, breath steaming in the frigid air. Their target? Not a ship, not a convoy, not a naval base. America itself. Tegami retrieves a metal cylinder the size of a large duffel bag, marked with the insignia of the Imperial Japanese Navy. It contains an aerial bomb, and beside it, a strange piece of equipment. A Yokosuka E-14Y Glenn float plane, the only aircraft of the war ever launched from submarine. Two sailors begin assembling the folded wings on the cramped deck. Tegami stands watch. "This is the message we send," he says quietly. "The Americans must know their homeland is not beyond our reach." When the tiny aircraft lifts off and vanishes into the fog, its pilot carries a single incendiary bomb, aimed at igniting the dense Oregon forests and triggering a devastating wildfire. The attempt fails, but the point is made. The U.S. West Coast is no longer theoretical. It is a battlefield. Just weeks earlier, June 21st, 1942, Fort Stevens, Oregon. The night is muggy, with thick cloud cover hugging the Columbia River mouth. In the darkness offshore, another Japanese submarine, I-25, under Tegami's earlier command, disconnects from the tide. The gun crew assembles a 5.5-inch deck gun. Tegami gives the order. Commence fire. A thunderous boom splits the night. Then another. Shells arc high into the sky, hissing like burning comets before plunging onto American soil. Surfing their echoes, the men of Fort Stevens scramble to their guns. But their commander, Colonel Diller, holds up a hand. No return fire. His reasoning: to fire back would reveal their position. Their batteries were old. Their range was too short. If they fired blindly, they risked giving the submarine a perfect firing solution. The American fort sits still in the darkness, absorbing the barrage. The shells crater an empty baseball field, sever a phone line, shatter a power pole. Minimal damage. No casualties. But the psychological blow is enormous. For the first time since the War of 1812, a foreign power has shelled the continental United States. The public never fully learns how close the submarine came to targeting the Columbia River bridges, or coastal radar, or the naval armories, or the power grids. The truth fuels a panic up and down the West Coast, bubbling beneath the censor's edits. People begin demanding coastal defense like never before. Back in Washington, D.C., High Command spreads maps across a long oak table. Red pins mark the submarine attacks. USS Indianapolis, USS Wasp, Fort Stevens, shelling California tanker attacks, Oregon, firebomb missions, Santa Barbara oil field, shelling dozens of lost fishing boats and merchant ships. Each pin is a warning. Each pin shows what the Japanese fearlessly attempted, and what the U.S. blindly assumed could never happen. Admiral King slams his palm on the table. No more guessing. No more half measures. He issues new directives. Reinforce West Coast radar nets, extend aircraft patrol grids 500 miles offshore, arm merchant ships, establish night fighter squadrons from Seattle to San Diego, conduct constant anti-submarine sweeps, using destroyer escorts, create new naval air stations along the entire Pacific coast, mandate convoy systems for high-value cargo. America is now officially fighting a defensive war on two oceans. But the shift didn't come from a grand battle or a major offensive. It came from single torpedoes, single shells, single submarines creeping close enough to see the lights of American towns flickering along the coast. That realization shakes the U.S. military establishment to its core and forces the largest homeland reorganization since Pearl Harbor. But the Japanese submarines are not done, and neither is the shockwave they're about to send across the Pacific. The day the Pacific turned into a killing ground. September 15, 1942, South Pacific, 200 miles from the Solomon Islands. Dawn breaks in thin ribbons of silver-blue light over calm seas. The carrier USS Wasp, CV-7, cuts a steady path through the water, her deck bustling with sailors prepping aircraft for yet another day of operations in the brutal Guadalcanal campaign. Pilots run pre-flight checks. Deck crews move ammunition carts. The smell of fuel hangs in the air like a constant reminder of danger. On the bridge, Captain Forrest P. Sherman sips a cup of bitter Navy coffee. He glances toward the horizon, calm, open water. "We've had quiet seas lately," a junior officer remarks. Sherman nods, but his eyes narrow slightly. Quiet seas, he knows, often means something is lurking beneath them. Below that deceptively calm surface, I-19, commanded by the skilled Lieutenant Commander Takakazu Kanashi, glides silently toward its target. Kanashi adjusts the periscope and freezes. There it is, a gift from the sea gods. 3 American warships in a loose formation. The USS Wasp, aircraft carrier the battleship USS North Carolina, the destroyer USS O'Brien. 1 torpedo volley. 3 strikes. A chance so rare, even veteran submariners whisper about it. Kanashi makes the decision with ice-cold precision. All torpedo tubes fire. 6 torpedoes streak forward, slipping into the undercurrent. White trails dissolving in the blue, silent as fate. Aboard USS Wasp, 2 minutes later, a thunderclap erupts beneath the ship. The deck shudders. Sailors are thrown off their feet. Then, boom, a second explosion. A third. Fireballs rip through hangar bays as aviation fuel ignites. Flames leap skyward, engulfing parked aircraft. Painted metal peels like melting wax. Captain Sherman's voice booms over the loudspeakers. "This is the captain. Damage control teams to stations. Move." Smoke pours across the flight deck. Sailors sprint through flame and debris, dragging injured men toward the rails. The ship lists sharply to port. "Sir," an officer shouts. "Fires are out of control." Sherman doesn't hesitate. "All hands, abandon ship." Men leap into the flame-scarred water below as Wasp's hull burns from bow to stern. Oil slicks ignite, sending fires skittering across the waves. Minutes later, the order is irreversible. Scuttle her. Explosive charges detonate deep in the carrier's belly. The USS Wasp, pride of Task Force 18, rolls slowly, almost reluctantly, and slips beneath the Pacific. But the torpedoes are not done. The remaining salvo continues forward, as if hunting prey on their own. One slams into the USS O'Brien, tearing open her bow. The destroyer limps away but sinks weeks later during repairs, her hull weakened beyond salvation. Another torpedo veers and strikes the battleship USS North Carolina, flooding compartments and killing 10 sailors, forcing the mighty ship to withdraw from months of repairs. 1 volley. 3 ships hit. Thousands of American sailors suddenly fighting for their lives. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is stunned. This isn't a lucky strike. This is a warning. Back in Pearl Harbor, days later, Admiral Nimitz stands at a long table cluttered with reports. Photos of Wasps sinking burn in his mind. Columns of smoke, sailors clinging to debris, lifeboats scattered across the waves like fallen leaves. A junior officer enters the room with a folder. "Submarine attack analysis, sir." Nimitz doesn't look up. "Tell me what I already know." The officer hesitates. "Our convoys are exposed. Our patrol grids are too shallow. Our radar coverage along the west coast is thin. And submarine detection in the open Pacific is inadequate." Nimitz finally lifts his head. Inadequate gets carriers sunk. He grips the edge of the table. "These submarines are attacking our supply lines. our coastlines, our carriers, and doing it with impunity. That ends now. Within days, the Pacific transforms. Destroyer escorts surge from American shipyards. Cheap, fast, built specifically to hunt submarines. The Navy expands coastal radar nets from San Diego to Alaska. PBY Catalina patrol squadrons triple their coverage, flying day and night. Long-range B-24 liberators begin prowling the western Pacific like steel-winged predators. New convoy rules demand every merchant vessel sail with armed escort. Civilian fishing fleets receive encrypted radio channels to report submarine sightings. Even the West Coast itself prepares. Anti-sub nets stretched across major harbor spotter towers built along beaches. Naval militias trained in emergency defense. Blackout rules reinstated for coastal towns. New naval air stations opened in California, Oregon, and Washington. The Pacific becomes a battlefield of sonar pings, depth charge plumes, and endless patrol arcs, all triggered by a handful of torpedoes fired from the shadows. Kanashi's attack becomes a turning point, a strategic slap that forces America to harden every inch of its western frontier. But Japan has one final, shocking submarine operation left, one that will strike closer to home than ever before. And it begins with a single officer aboard I-25 giving a pilot an impossible order. Fire from the sky, the Japanese submarine that bombed America. September 9th, 1942, off the coast of Oregon, early morning. A thick blanket of fog rolls across the Pacific, swallowing the horizon in a muted haze. Waves lap quietly against a dark steel hull just beneath the surface. The submarine is I-25, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Meiji Tegami. The crew moves with hushed urgency. Men whisper. Tools clank softly. The air smells like diesel fuel and damp steel. They're about to do something no Japanese submarine has ever attempted, and something no American would believe possible. Tegami nods to his flight crew. Prepare the aircraft. Yes, the aircraft, because I-25 carries a folded, compact seaplane inside a watertight hangar. The Yokosuka E-14 Wigland. As the sub surfaces, the crew lifts the metal hangar hatch. Saltwater spills off the edges. Moonlight glints on the miniature wings as the mechanics free the aircraft piece by piece, assembling it atop the submarine like a bizarre mechanical bird. Pilot Nobuo Fujita climbs into the cockpit, leather jacket zipped tight, goggles resting above the brim of his cap. His observer, Shoji Okuda, settles in behind him with maps, flares, and a single incendiary bomb. A bomb meant for American soil. Okuda leans forward. You ready? Fujita gives a curt nod. The propeller coughs, sputters, then whirs to life, steady and sharp against the fog-muted air. Tegami watches from a bridge. Launch. The Glen rolls forward on a small dolly, hits the ocean wind, and lifts off the submarine's deck, skimming upward into the dense morning fog. I-25 dives the moment the aircraft clears its bow. Minutes later, above the Oregon coast, the world is a swirling canvas of mist and pine-smelling wind. Beneath them, the coast of America appears like a shadow rising from the sea. Fujita levels the aircraft and begins climbing. Okuda scans the forested mountains. There, he whispers, look for dry timber. It needs to burn, because their mission is simple and terrifying. Start a forest fire so large that American resources will be pulled from the Pacific front. Diversion, chaos, psychological warfare, all delivered by a single submarine and one tiny seaplane. They fly inland for several miles until Okuda spots a suitable target. Dry brush and fir trees stretching across a mountainside like a powder keg. Fujita banks sharply. Dropping now, Okuda arms the incendiary bomb, stamped with Japanese characters and designed to ignite upon impact. He pulls the release. A metallic clunk. The bomb falls, disappearing into the blanket of trees below. A second later, a flash of fire blossoms among the pines. Smoke curls upward in a thin gray ribbon. They circle once more. Fire spreading, Okuda reports. Mission successful. But Fujita notices something. Wind, moisture, fog. The Pacific Northwest climate is fighting the flames. Not yet a roaring inferno, but it could become one. They turn back toward the ocean. Meanwhile, on the Oregon coast, U.S. Forest Service fire Lookout Howard Ridge Runner, Gardner spots smoke rising through the morning haze. He radios for assistance, thinking it's a routine lightning fire. But when he reaches the ridge, he finds the unmistakable fragments of a foreign-made bomb. He freezes, then runs. Within hours, the U.S. Navy, Army, and FBI are swarming the forest. Pieces of bomb casing are collected. Photos are taken. Maps marked. There's no denying it. The Japanese have bombed the mainland United States. Aboard I-25 later that night, Fujita's plane splashes down and is recovered, bolted back into the submarine hangar. The crew celebrates quietly, passing around rice balls and weak sake. They believe they've pulled off a daring blow that will rattle America's psyche. Tegami writes in the logbook, "Mission accomplished. America struck at home." But he doesn't know something crucial. The fire fizzles out. Damp ground prevents catastrophe. Yet the psychological shock is enormous. For the first time since the War of 1812, a foreign power has attacked the U.S. mainland, and the U.S. military reacts instantly. Washington, D.C., 48 hours later, Admiral Ernest King slams a briefing report onto his desk. The submarine launched a plane, he growls. A plane? On our coast. He turns to his staff. We expand surveillance. We extend radar coverage. And we put aircraft on every stretch of this damn shoreline. Commanders scribble frantically. Radar towers pop up along Oregon and Washington. Patrol aircraft begin flying deeper and more frequently along the coast. Submarine nets strengthen at harbor mouths. Civilian spotter programs receive urgent upgrades. And most importantly, Japanese submarine operations along the American coast start getting intercepted. The ocean grows smaller for them, more dangerous, more hunted, all because one Glenn seaplane dropped one bomb on one forest ridge. The Americans take no chances now. They've learned their lesson, and they are about to learn an even harsher one. When a Japanese torpedo sinks a ship so important that its loss will become one of the greatest tragedies in U.S. naval history. The torpedo that blindsided America. July 30th, 1945, Philippine Sea, 0004 hours. The ocean is calm. The sky is moonless. The water is black glass stretching into infinity. USS Indianapolis, CA-35, fresh off delivering parts for the atomic bombs that will soon end the war, cuts through the night at 17 knots. Her bow cleaves the waves with rhythmic certainty. Her decks are quiet. Half the crew sleeps, the others standing routine watches. Captain Charles McVeigh leans over the chart table inside the bridge, reading his navigation notes under the dim red glow of combat lamps. A fan hums softly behind him. He doesn't know it yet, but a Japanese captain is staring directly at him through a periscope. 5 miles away, submarine I-58, under Commander Makitsura Hashimoto, has been tracking Indianapolis for hours. Inside the sub's narrow torpedo room, sailors whisper sharply, moving with brisk precision. Sweat glistens on their necks. The air is thick with diesel fumes and the metallic tang of weapons oil. Hashimoto studies the silhouette through his eyepiece. A heavy cruiser, big, fast, important, and unaware of his presence. He lowers the periscope. Flood tubes 1 through 6. The order echoes down the hull. The Indianapolis sails onward. Dark, alone, unescorted, and exposed. 0008 hours. Hashimoto's voice is low, steady, almost cold. Fire. The salvo erupts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 total. Type 95 torpedoes, the fastest in the world, race silently through the Pacific darkness. On Indianapolis, no one sees them coming. No radar picks them up. No sonar ping warns them. No escort ship is nearby to screen the waters. America's coast defense lessons did not reach the open Pacific in time. Aboard Indianapolis, 0014 hours. Carl Wenzel, a 19-year-old seaman standing lookout on the starboard bow, suddenly hears it. A deep, underwater roar. He frowns, leaning forward. Then the ocean erupts beneath him. Boom! A torpedo tears into the starboard side near the bow, sending a column of fire and water into the air. Metal screams. Deck plates buckle. Lights snap off. Steam ruptures from broken pipes. 2 seconds later, boom! Another torpedo slams into the ship's midsection. Fuel ignites instantly. Men are thrown from their bunks. Machinery tears loose from mounts. Bulkheads collapse inward. Captain McVeigh is knocked sideways, gripping a rail to stay upright. Damage control. All hands abandon. He never finishes. A fireball sweeps through the passageway, swallowing sailors whole. Indy begins to list sharply. Water floods compartments with terrifying speed. She is dying. Fast. In the water. Hundreds of men leap or are blown into the sea. Oil spreads across the surface, thick and burning. Sailors gasp for breath, sputtering black fuel. Others cling to floating debris. Life rings, planks, shattered rafts. For many, the ship is gone before their minds can accept it. Indianapolis sinks in just 12 minutes. The ocean goes quiet again, disturbed only by the cries of hundreds of men struggling in the dark. No distress signal is received. No lookout reports the sinking. No radar station tracks the ship's disappearance. In the vast Pacific, Indianapolis simply vanishes. Aboard I-58, Hashimoto hears the explosions and feels the tremor ripple through the submarine hull. His crew erupts in celebration. He does not. He peers through the periscope again. He sees oil on the water, sailors flailing, flames dancing on the surface, debris drifting. He exhales once long, slow. It is done, he says. Then he orders a dive. The submarine slips beneath the waves, leaving the survivors to their fate. No one aboard I-58 knows that Indianapolis carried parts of the most important weapons ever built. No one knows that the sinking will lead to one of the worst naval disasters in U.S. history. No one knows that this single torpedo attack will ignite a firestorm inside the U.S. Navy and reshape its entire Pacific defense policy. But Washington will learn soon. And when it does, the entire West Coast defense network will be rebuilt. The silence that changed everything. July 30th, 1945, 0200 hours. The ocean is black, oil-coated, silent, except for the scattered voices of men calling out across the waves. Some cling to flotsam, pieces of bulkhead, upside-down rafts, broken planks. Others tread water with burning lungs. A few pray, a few scream. Many simply float, stunned, unable to process the scale of the catastrophe. Above them, the stars will calmly across the sky, indifferent to the suffering below. Seaman Second Class Jack Miner tries to keep his head above the oil, blinking away the sting. His stomach churns at the taste of fuel. His life vest barely keeps him afloat. Around him, shadows bob in the swell. Where's the rescue ships? He asks no one in particular. But no ship is coming. No one knows they're out here. In the operations center at Leyte, a clerk notes that Indianapolis has not yet checked in at her scheduled arrival point. He shrugs. Ships are late all the time. He stamps a routine no report and moves on. This is the fatal flaw, the same one exposed years earlier by submarine attacks off the American coast. The same flaw America vowed to fix after WASP went down. The same flaw West Coast commanders begged Washington to address. A gap in the tracking system. A blind spot large enough to swallow a cruiser whole. And it just did. Dawn, July 31st, 1945. The survivors drift in clusters. Some are already hallucinating. Others have slipped beneath the waves silently, exhausted and dehydrated. The sun rises like a blowtorch on the horizon. The ocean begins to shimmer with heat. Sailors try to shield their faces with their hands. But the worst is coming. Shadows appear in the water. Long, dark, moving. One man screams. Sharks! Hundreds of fins slice through the surface. The predators have been circling since the ship went down. Now hunger drives them closer. A man 50 yards away is yanked under. Blood boils upward. The survivors kick their feet desperately, trying to stay close together. But they drift apart. Fear fractures the group. Men cry for help. Others go silent. Some lash out at phantoms in the water. And above it all, a single question hangs in the air like smoke. Why hasn't anyone come? 2,000 miles away, Pearl Harbor Naval HQ. Admiral Chester Nimitz reviews convoy reports. His desk is cluttered with status updates from across the Pacific. Radar tracking sheets, patrol routes, deployment rosters. He does not know Indianapolis is missing. A junior officer knocks and enters, handing a stack of decoded messages. No urgent reports. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. Because the system has failed. Just as it failed in 1942 when Japanese submarines stalked the American coastline, torpedoing ships within sight of civilians. After Wasp was sunk. After Indianapolis's earlier near miss in 1943. After attacks on coastal freighters. After the shelling of West Coast targets. Warnings came every year. Fix the gaps. Tighten the tracking. Reinforce the radar net. Don't assume a missing ship is late. But bureaucracy moves slower than torpedoes. Indianapolis is the price. Back in the water, August 1st. The men have been drifting for nearly 2 full days. Sunburns blister across their backs. Tongues swell. Lips crack. The salt water eats at their skin. Lieutenant Thomas Haynes tries to keep morale alive. We'll be found, he insists. They know we're out here. He knows it's a lie. But lies are all they have left. A sailor beside him whispers, barely audible. Sir, I saw a B-24 yesterday, didn't look down. Haynes closes his eyes. A reconnaissance aircraft did fly over them. And missed them. A single glance downward could have saved hundreds. But the bomber wasn't looking for survivors. Because no one knew survivors existed. Another crack in the defense system. Another failure that began years earlier when the U.S. chose to assume the Pacific was too large for such catastrophes. But the Japanese submarine fleet proved otherwise. 11:10 a.m., August 2nd, 1945. A PV-1 Ventura patrol bomber from VPB 152 sweeps across the ocean, searching for enemy submarines near the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Wilbur Chuck Gwynn scans the waves below. He adjusts the sun glare shield on his cockpit window. Something catches his eye, a faint glimmer on the sea surface. Oil? Wreckage? Movement? He banks sharply. Then he sees them. Dozens, no, hundreds of specks floating in the water. Some waving, some barely moving, some not moving at all. Human, Navy men, survivors. His heart races. Jesus, get on the radio now. The radio man snaps open the transmitter. This is Ventura 152. We have sighted men in the water. Hundreds of them. Requesting emergency rescue forces immediately. The call shoots across Pacific channels like a lightning strike. The U.S. Navy freezes. Men in the water? Hundreds? Where? Gwynn circles again. He sees the torn life vests. The oil slick. The drifting clusters of survivors. And then it hits him. These aren't downed aviators. These are the crew of a major warship. Dear God, he whispers. Indianapolis. Within minutes, destroyers begin sprinting toward the location. PBY Catalina scramble. Hospital ships receive emergency alerts. The Pacific Fleet stirs into action like a startled giant. The worst naval disaster in U.S. history, caused by a single torpedo, made catastrophic by systemic failures, is finally uncovered. But as rescue ships race toward the scene, the U.S. government begins asking questions. Dangerous questions. Questions that will force America to rethink every assumption about its Pacific defense. The rescue that exposed the system. August 2nd, 1945, afternoon. The first rescue aircraft appears as a speck against the blinding sky. Carl Gores, one of the survivors, can barely raise his arm. His skin is cracked from sun and salt. His throat feels like sandpaper, but he forces one last moment of strength, lifting his hand toward the sound. A PBY Catalina sweeps low, so low the roar of its engines rolls across the water like a passing storm. Men in the water begin shouting. We're trying to shout. Most can only croak. Some can't speak at all, but they wave. God, do they wave. The PBY circles once, twice, then drops a life raft near one of the tighter clusters. As the aircraft turns again, something unbelievable happens. It lands, right there on the open ocean. The pilot, Lieutenant Adrian Marks, ignores procedure, ignores orders, ignores every regulation in the PBY manual. Because he sees the sharks. He sees the bodies. He sees the desperation. He brings the massive flying boat down onto the swells, the impact shuddering through its airframe as water sprays across the windows. Inside the cockpit, his co-pilot yells, "We're going to break the wings if we take on more weight." Marks ignores him. "We're not leaving them," he snaps. As the plane floats, sailors begin climbing onto its wings, or being lifted up, or dragged aboard by the crewmen leaning out of every hatch. Oil-coated men cry openly as their fingers touch metal. Some kiss the wing. Some collapse from sheer relief. One survivor whispers, barely conscious, "I thought we were gone. Thought we were all gone." Marks calls back, "Hold on, son. You're safe now." But the plane is already riding low in the water. Too low. The crew stops counting how many they've pulled aboard. There's no point. They simply keep going. Hours later, the first destroyer arrives. USS Cecil J. Doyle bursts onto the scene at flank speed, about cutting through the swells in a plume of white spray. Captain W. Graham Claytor Jr. orders the ship's 24-inch searchlights angled skyward, an insane risk in wartime. A beacon, a lighthouse, a promise. "We're here. We found you. You're not alone anymore." The survivors weep at the sight, their bodies shaking with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Claytor wastes no time. Boats are lowered, corpsmen descend ropes, cargo nets drop over the sides. Sweep the area. Grab every life vest you see. If they're breathing, pull them in. If they're not, pull them in anyway. The water churns with activity. Some men are lifted from the sea, still clinging to debris. Some are delirious. Some resist rescue, confused and hallucinating from dehydration. Others don't respond at all. But the ships keep coming. Destroyers, destroyer escorts, multiple rescue vessels. A fleet assembled in hours. A fleet that should have been assembled days earlier. Meanwhile, at Naval Command, Pearl Harbor, reports flood in. Survivors located. Estimate 200, 300, possibly more. Admirals gather around the operations table, tracing the coordinates with grave expressions. One senior officer mutters, "This shouldn't be possible. How do we lose track of a heavy cruiser?" A communications officer hesitates before answering. "There was no arrival check-in, sir. She was assumed delayed." Nimitz clenches his jaw. Assumed. The word hangs in the room like a curse. Someone else asks, "What about shark reports? Oil slicks?" The reply is soft. "There were none filed, sir. No one was looking." The silence that follows is suffocating. Because the truth is obvious. This disaster isn't just the fault of a Japanese submarine. It's the fault of a system that ignored every lesson from the West Coast attacks years earlier. The shelling near Santa Barbara. The sinking of coastal freighters. The attack on USS Wasp. The earlier torpedo strikes on Indianapolis herself. The 1942 panic that triggered radar expansion and convoy escorts. Every incident warned the U.S. Navy that Japanese submarines were bold, capable, and opportunistic. Every warning urged tighter tracking, better communication, and mandatory position reports. Every warning was known, but not acted upon. And now hundreds of young sailors have paid the price. Back on the ocean, night of August 2nd. The temperature drops. Men huddle on the destroyer's decks, wrapped in blankets. Some sip water slowly with trembling hands. Others cannot stop crying. Some sit alone, staring at the horizon in silence. A few stare at the bread, the broth, the coffee placed in front of them, unable to comprehend plenty. After days of nothing, the PBY Catalina floats nearby, its wings sagging under the weight of survivors still clinging to it. Marks looks out from his cockpit at the rescue ships. He knows he saved dozens. He also knows many more never saw sunrise. He lowers his head, not from guilt, but from anger. Anger at the system. Anger at the oversight. Anger that a heavy cruiser full of sailors could vanish without anyone noticing. Indianapolis has been found, but the truth behind her loss is only beginning to surface. The investigation that shocked Washington. August 3rd, 1945, Pearl Harbor headquarters. The war room is suffocatingly quiet. Charts, maps, and decoded message logs are spread across a massive cedar table. Admiral Chester Nimitz stands rigidly at its head, arms folded behind his back, his expression unreadable but his eyes cold with restrained fury. A junior intelligence officer reads aloud. USS Indianapolis did not send a distress signal. She was not expected on any specific schedule. Her non-arrival was not considered suspicious. No request for confirmation was issued. The officer's voice breaks slightly. Sir, she just disappeared. Nimitz exhales through his nose. Ships don't disappear, he says. Men disappear. Steel sinks. But ships do not simply vanish without someone asking why. An advisor speaks cautiously. Sir, the Pacific Fleet's priority this late in the war has shifted toward. Nimitz cuts him off, voice low but sharp as a knife. Priority does not excuse negligence. No one responds. Another officer speaks. There were intelligence reports of a submarine operating near the ship's route. Nimitz nods grimly. From the same class that attacked our west coast in '42, sank Wasp, torpedoed freighters off California, and nearly hit Enterprise. He taps the map. A system built on assumptions doesn't survive an enemy that does not assume. His words settle heavily. The room knows what he means. For years, America had known Japanese submarines were bold, willing to strike close to U.S. shores, willing to ambush major fleet units, and capable of slipping into convoy lanes undetected. And yet, Indianapolis sailed alone. No escort, no zigzagging at night, no verification of arrival. One torpedo, and the flaws in the entire West Coast and Central Pacific Defense Network were laid bare. Meanwhile, aboard USS Cecil J. Doyle, survivors sit in rows along the deck, wrapped in blankets, their faces pale but alive. Corpsmen move between them, checking pupils, taking pulse rates, offering water in measured sips. Salt sores blister their skin. Eyes remain sunken. Many are delirious. Carl Thomas, a young sailor barely 18, stares blankly at the steel deck. A corpsman kneels beside him. You're safe now, the medic says gently. You're aboard, Doyle. Carl doesn't answer. His lips tremble. His voice is almost a whisper. We sent distress signals right after the torpedoes. We thought someone heard us. The corpsman hesitates. He doesn't know what to say, because the truth is brutally simple. No one heard them, or no one listened, or no one believed the report mattered. That truth becomes the breaking point for several sailors. Another survivor asks weakly, Sir, they knew we were coming, didn't they? Someone knew. The corpsman closes his eyes. He cannot lie. Not to these men. No, he says softly. They didn't. The sailor's expression collapses into a mix of grief and disbelief. How, he whispers. How do you lose a whole cruiser? His hands shake violently. How do you not notice? Another sailor, hearing this exchange, begins to cry quietly. Not out of trauma from the sinking, but from the realization that the ocean wasn't the only thing trying to kill them. Back at Pearl Harbor, later that day, a devastating truth emerges. 3 separate intelligence warnings, all indicating submarine activity along Indianapolis's route, were never linked together. One was filed. One was lost in paperwork. One sat on a desk, unreviewed. A communications officer speaks. There was no requirement to check a ship's arrival unless escorted. Another adds, convoy protocols weren't applied. She was treated like a safe transit. A third officer, visibly shaken, whispers, Sir, these procedures were never updated after the submarine attacks on the West Coast. We strengthened radar, we strengthened air patrols, we rewrote coastal defense plans. Nimitz looks at him sharply. But we didn't rewrite tracking procedures. The officer nods. And now, his voice cracks. Now hundreds of sailors paid for that oversight. August 4th, 1945, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, California. News arrives on the West Coast. Families gather outside naval offices, waiting, hoping, praying. A mother grips a telegram with trembling hands, staring at every arriving officer as if he might bring her son home. Another woman whispers to her husband. They said she sank days ago, and no one noticed. Her voice breaks. Days. Across the country, radios repeat the same words. Indianapolis discovered. Survivors rescued. Casualties heavy. But the newspapers don't yet mention the truth. Not the truth behind the truth. Not the truth that stings Washington hardest. Not the truth that Japanese submarines expose flaws the U.S. should have fixed after 1942. Night, aboard the ships at sea, as sailors sleep fitfully on stretchers, hammocks, and blankets across the decks, Captain Claytor writes in his logbook, "It is my opinion many more could have been saved had our procedures been adequate." He stops writing for a moment, staring out across the moonlit sea. Then he adds one final line. The ocean did not kill these men alone. The West Coast learns the hard way. October 6, 1942. Off the coast of Crescent City, California. The fog had rolled in thick from the Pacific, turning the early morning into a cold, muted dreamscape. Fishermen on wooden trawlers moved through the gray nothingness like ghosts, their diesel engines rattling low and steady. No one saw the danger lurking beneath them. No one ever did. 400 feet below the surface, a steel shape glided silently through the gloom. Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-25, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Tegami Meiji. The same submarine that had shelled Fort Stevens months earlier. The same crew that had launched the tiny Yokosuka E-14 Y Glenn float plane on reconnaissance flights over Oregon. Now, they stalked the U.S. coastline with renewed confidence. Tegami peered through the periscope, the green-tinted lens catching the faint outline of the American shore. Not a warship today, no cruiser, no destroyer, nothing armored. Only an unarmed coastal steamer plodding north at 8 knots, carrying lumber, mail, and food. Soft targets, yes, but still targets. Fire 1. Fire 2. 2 white trails burst from bow tubes, slicing upward toward the surface. A fisherman aboard the Helen B. heard the first explosion before he saw anything, an echoing boom that rolled across the water like muted thunder. When he turned, the cargo ship SS Camden was already folding into itself, flames licking upward from the hull. Men scrambled across the deck, some leaping into the freezing surf as the list grew steeper. To the Japanese crew, the sinking was almost anticlimactic. No counterattack, no patrol aircraft diving from the clouds, no destroyers racing in to chase them down. Nothing. Tegami lowered the scope and exhaled. America's coast, he murmured, is unguarded. He was right. And in Washington, the implications landed like a torpedo of their own. By the time the Navy pieced together what happened off Crescent City, panic rippled through West Coast command posts. This wasn't a distant threat anymore. This was on their doorstep, hundreds of miles inside American waters. At Naval Air Station Alameda, junior officers rushed across the tarmac as 4 PV-1 Ventura patrol bombers were ordered into immediate coastal search. Mechanics scrambled to arm them with depth charges, while pilots strapped in and waited for clearance. Every radar station along the coast was told to extend its scanning range. Every available patrol craft, old Coast Guard cutters, newly built subchasers, even requisitioned yachts, was sent out into the chop. But it wasn't enough, because intelligence officers quickly put together the pattern. I-17 shelled the California oil fields at Elwood. I-25 bombed Oregon forests using its seaplane. I-26 attacked ships near Washington State. I-19 sank the Wasp, damaged the North Carolina, and nearly sank the O'Brien, all with a single spread of torpedoes. And now I-25 had torpedoed the Camden just miles off the U.S. shoreline. This was not harassment anymore. This was strategy. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, American commanders realized the uncomfortable truth. The West Coast was nearly undefended. Inside a Navy war room in San Francisco, Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher studied a map pinned across the wall. Red markers dotted the coastline, each one a Japanese submarine attack. As reports came in, officers added more. Norfolk had nothing like this. New York had nothing like this. Only the Pacific coast was bleeding. Fletcher rubbed his temples. How many long-range subs do they still have, he asked. Intelligence believes at least 15 operating from Kwajalein and Truk, an aide replied. All capable of reaching the continental U.S. And how far out do our patrols extend? The aide hesitated. Not far enough, sir. Fletcher didn't answer. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew what came next. Convoy lanes, continuous patrol cycles, expanded radar stations, coastal blackouts, armed blimps, picket ships, and subchasers placed like stepping stones up and down the coastline. All because of a few Japanese submarines with long-range, aggressive commanders and torpedoes that always seem to find their mark. Carl Donit's U-boats terrorized the Atlantic. But in the Pacific, it was the I-boats that rewrote the rulebook, and the United States could no longer pretend the threat was temporary. Not after WASP, not after Indianapolis, not after the burning silhouette of SS Camden slid beneath the cold California water. The West Coast was no longer a safe shoreline. It was a battlefield, and America was late to fortify it. The race to seal the Pacific Gate. August 1942. Naval Air Station Moffett Field, Sunnyvale, California. Fog rolls in from the bay like a slow-moving tide, thick enough that sailors can taste the brine on their tongues. Floodlights paint pale cones across the airship hangars. Those enormous wooden cathedrals built to house coastal blimps, now beating hearts of a West Coast suddenly awake. Commander Harold Red Simmons stands beside a row of partially fueled PBY-5A Catalinas. His hands rest on his hips, jaw tight, eyes following the motion of deck crews dragging carts of depth charges toward the aircraft. These bombs used to sit and use for months at a time. Now they disappear daily. The Japanese haven't landed on American soil. They don't need to. Their submarines travel the coastline as if it were their own highway. Simmons scans the hangar interior. A dozen crews prep for takeoff. Engines warm. Ground crews shout over the deep rumble of Pratt and Whitney radial engines kicking into their throaty growl. Lieutenant, he calls to a young officer jogging past. What's the range on the new radar arrays? Just over 60 miles if the sea clutter behaves, sir. We'll have a cleaner track once the tower is finished. Simmons nods. Radar towers, still experimental, still crude, are being planted along the coastline in a rush. They sprout like steel skeletons on every high bluff from San Diego to the Olympic Peninsula. But it's not enough. Not yet. He turns as he hears footsteps, sharp, hurried, purposeful. Admiral Chester C. Quinn, Pacific Sea Frontier Command, strides across the tarmac with a small entourage. He looks like he hasn't slept in 2 days. His uniform is wrinkled, his cap pushed forward, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Commander Simmons, Quinn greets him. You're launching the next patrol? Yes, sir. And doubling the sweep area. Quinn inhales deeply. Good. Because Washington wants results. Not guesses. Not assumptions. Proof. Simmons knows exactly what he means. Proof that the West Coast isn't safe. Proof that the Japanese submarines are still here. Proof that the attacks on merchant ships, refineries, and Fort Stevens weren't isolated. Proof that the U.S. Navy can stop them. Quinn stops walking and turns toward the rows of aircraft warming on the runway. I just came from San Francisco, the Admiral says. They're blacking out the entire coastline again tonight. Searchlights, patrol boats, the works. Expecting company, sir? Quinn gives a humorless smile. We're always expecting company now. The next hour unfolds like a carefully rehearsed ballet of wartime urgency. Ground crew loads depth charges, some new, many old enough to make pilots nervous, onto Catalina wings. Aviation machinists perform rapid inspections. Radio operators test frequencies recently revised because Japanese subs have begun jamming transmissions. And inside the hangar, a new tool waits, sleek, unfamiliar, and still experimental. An SCR, 517 air-to-surface radar. The Navy's latest attempt to turn the night sky into a battlefield the Japanese cannot hide inside. Lieutenant Bill Granger studies the machine with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "This thing actually pick up a sub?" he asks. "Surface silhouette?" "Sure," the technician replies. "If it's awash. If it's running shallow. If Neptune feels kind." Granger smirks. "So a maybe, the tech confirms. But better than none." Granger pats the black metal casing. In a world where submarines appear and disappear like ghosts, maybe is progress. Before long, the Catalinas begin taxiing out of the hangar one by one. Engines howl. Propellers spin. Waves of wind ripple across the tarmac. Admiral Quinn watches the first patrol plane lift off the runway and vanish into fog as dense as soup. Simmons steps beside him. "They'll search southeast first," the commander says. "Toward Monterey Bay. That's where the fishermen claim they saw a periscope." Quinn snorts softly. "Fishermen see periscopes in their sleep." "Not since the Wasp," Simmons replies quietly. The admiral falls silent. The USS Wasp, torpedoed days earlier in the Pacific by another Japanese submarine, is still burning in the minds of every man in uniform, as is the memory of the Indianapolis, hit by torpedoes months earlier and nearly sunk. Together, these losses prove that Japan's submarines are not reckless. They are strategic, disciplined, and effective. The West Coast was never supposed to be a battlefield, but submarines ignore oceans, borders, and illusions. By noon, the fog begins to lift. Sunlight breaks through, casting long shadows from the massive hangars onto rows of parked vehicles. Willis Jeeps, mobile radars, fuel trucks, ambulances. Quinn turns to Simmons. "Commander, we need more aircraft patrols. More eyes. I know. More blimps. I know. And more coordination with the Coast Guard." Simmons nods again, jaw tight. Finally, Quinn speaks the words both men dread. "We are stretched thin, too thin, and the Japanese know it." He glances at the horizon. "That's why we must seal the Pacific Gate before they slip something bigger through it." He means more than submarines. He means more than torpedoes. He means the possibility, however remote, of an attack on the continental United States. Simmons adjusts his cap. "We'll hold the line, Admiral." Quinn's reply is somber. "We don't have a line yet, Commander. Only intentions." The next patrol lifts off. Another follows. And another. One by one, the sky fills with the silhouettes of PBYs, dirigibles, and modified B-18 patrol bombers. The West Coast is becoming a fortress. Not because it wants to be, but because it must be. The race has begun. A race to rebuild defenses that never existed. A race to detect enemies that cannot be seen. A race to close every gap before another torpedo finds another American ship. Simmons watches the horizon. Quinn walks away with his staff. The submarine that wouldn't leave. September 1942. Point Arguello, California coastline. Midnight patrol zone. The moon is a thin silver blade above the Pacific, slicing across black water. Swells rise and fall in slow, heavy breaths, as if the ocean itself is asleep. But beneath that surface, something cold and metallic prowls, something that has haunted the West Coast for months. Japanese submarine I-25. Sleek, patient, and entirely too close. Inside the conning tower, the watch officer raises his binoculars, scanning the faint outline of the American coastline. He can see the shadow of the cliffs, the dim lighthouses, the stuttering beams of coastal searchlights still learning their new panic-driven routines. Below him, in the control room, Lieutenant Commander Meiji Tegami studies his chart. His finger traces the coastline with practiced precision. Astoria, Fort Stevens, Brookings, now Arguello. Tegami is not reckless. He is deliberate. He chooses targets not for their size, but for their vulnerability. He closes his eyes briefly, remembering the success at Fort Stevens, where his submarine shelled the American shore and caused chaos far beyond the minor damage inflicted. He remembers the coast-wide blackouts, the newspapers screaming, the radio reports stoking fear from San Diego to Seattle. Tonight, Tegami plans something quieter, something smaller, something psychological. A single torpedo, enough to remind America, I'm still here. Above the waves, 3 miles east, a U.S. Navy OS-2U Kingfisher observation plane rattles low over the surf. It's an old aircraft, slow, lightly armed, built more for training than combat. But tonight, it flies under the strict new doctrine. No stretch of coast goes unwatched. Not anymore. Ensign Jimmy Halpern sits in the rear seat, hunched over a primitive air-to-surface radar set bolted into the fuselage. It's barely more than a prototype, a box of tubes and crackling wires, but offers the faintest echo of hope. Static hums in Halpern's headset. Anything? The pilot asks. Just clutter, Halpern mutters. The sea's too calm. It's bouncing everything. He adjusts the dials, eyes narrowing. Something faint flickers on the scope, a tiny blip. It appears, disappears, appears again. Halpern frowns. There's something out there. The pilot banks slightly, angling toward the contact. Below them, Tegami senses something has changed. A faint vibration, a distant whine. Aircraft. He lowers himself into the control room. Depth 30 meters, he orders calmly. The submarine sinks beneath the surface, just as the Kingfisher's spotlight sweeps across the waves. Too late. Tegami has slipped away. Halpern curses under his breath. Lost him. The pilot circles once more. We can't track what we can't see, Jimmy. Halpern's jaw clenches. But he's out there. I know he is. Hours later, I-25 rises again, barely awash, periscope breaking the surface with a quiet ripple. Tegami peers through the eyepiece. A merchant ship glides into view, an aging freighter, stacked with cargo bound for San Francisco. Tegami exhales, frost fogging the scope. One torpedo, he murmurs. One message. He lowers the periscope and gives the order. Torpedo Tube 1 standby. 3 miles inland. A lonely U.S. coastal radar station hums in the dark. The SCR-270 unit, recently installed, still finicky, rotates its skeletal antenna toward the sea. Inside, technician Harold Donnelly scratches his chin, staring at the green screen. A blip appears, moves, disappears. He taps the screen. Another blip appears, larger this time. Steadier. Donnelly's eyes widen. Sir. The officer on duty leans over. What is that? Donnelly swallows. Surface contact. Fast. Heading straight for, oh God. The torpedo hits. Its detonation thunders across the Pacific like a hammer against an iron drum. The merchant ship shudders, lights flickering, before a column of water erupts against its hull. The bridge crew staggers. Radios explode with frantic calls. We're hit. We're hit. Unknown sub. The signal cuts. Smoke rises into the moonlight. And the U.S. West Coast learns, once again, that the war has not forgotten them. At Moffett Field, alarms blare. Commander Simmons storms into the operations center. What do we lose? He demands. A freighter. An officer replies breathlessly. 200 miles south. Witnesses saw the wake of a torpedo. Simmons closes his eyes. I-25. It has to be I-25. Scramble patrols, he orders, voice tight. All of them. Now. Sirens scream. Pilots sprint. Engines roar. Catalinas lift off one by one. Giant silhouettes rising into the night to chase a submarine that has already vanished beneath the black Pacific. Meanwhile, far offshore, Tegami watches the burning ship fade behind him. He feels no triumph, only duty, only purpose. These Americans, he muses quietly, believe their coastline is too large to defend. He turns to his helmsman. Take us north. Slowly, quietly. I-25 glides into the darkness. The West Coast awakens to a new war. September 30th, 1942, San Francisco Naval District Headquarters, 4:17 hours. The phone on the duty desk rings with a shrill urgency that cuts through the quiet like a blade. Lieutenant Robert McElvey snatches it up. Naval District Ops, McElvey. The voice on the other end is ragged, breathless. A radio operator aboard a nearby picket ship. Confirmed torpedoing off Point Arguello. Merchant freighter SS Camden. Vessel listing. Fires visible from 5 miles out. McElvey straightens, heart hammering. Survivors? Unknown. We're moving in. McElvey slams the phone down and rushes toward the command office, boots echoing against the cold tile floor. He bursts through the door. Sir, we've got another one. Rear Admiral John Greenslade looks up from his desk. He doesn't react with shock, not even anger, just a slow, weary exhale, like a man receiving the same bad news for the 100th time. How bad? Direct hit. She's burning. Witnesses say they saw the torpedo wake. Greenslade leans back in his chair, eyes narrowing. I-25 again. It isn't a question. McElvey nods. Greenslade turns toward the wall map. California's coastline stretching from San Diego to Crescent City, dotted with tiny pins marking previous attacks. Each pin is a scar, and they keep multiplying. We prepared for a carrier raid, Greenslade mutters. Aerial bombardment. Maybe sabotage. But this. His hand hovers over the map. This is something we were never ready for. The morning after, the coastline feels the blow. The sun rises slowly, revealing a coastline on edge. At Coast Guard Station Morro Bay, sailors gather around the radio as news spreads. They hit another one last night. Where? South of Arguello. Same sub. Has to be. A young seaman stares out across the fog-choked harbor, gripping his coffee mug with white knuckles. How is one sub making fools of us? Chief Petty Officer Daniels answers without turning. Because it's not one sub. It's the ocean. And the ocean is bigger than all of us. Survivors reach shore. By mid-morning, the first lifeboat from SS Camden washes onto the beach near Jalama. 4 men stumble onto the sand. 2 collapse immediately. The others stagger toward a group of Marines who are rushed to the scene. One survivor, face scorched and blackened with soot, gasps. Came out of nowhere. No warning ship, just... He mimes an explosion with trembling hands. A Marine sergeant wraps a blanket around his shoulders. You're safe now. But the survivor shakes his head violently. No one is safe. Not while that submarine is still out there. Washington demands answers. Hours later, in Washington, D.C., the news hits the Navy Department like a hammer. In the Navy Operations Center, Admiral Ernest King throws the latest report onto a conference table. 1 torpedo, he growls. 1 damn torpedo, and the entire West Coast is shutting down trade routes. A staff officer clears his throat nervously. Sir, the press is already reporting widespread panic. Several ports are requesting emergency convoys. King turns on him sharply. Convoys? On the U.S. West Coast? Against a single submarine? The officer hesitates. With respect, sir, that single submarine has hit more targets on our coastline than any enemy vessel in U.S. history. King freezes. Because the officer is right. The submarine threat is real, persistent, and humiliating. King leans forward, gripping the table. Then we change the plan. Right now, he looks to Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner and Admiral Chester Nimitz, who have joined by secure teleconference for Pearl Harbor. We've been treating the West Coast as a rear area, King says. That ends today. Nimitz nods gravely. Agreed. The Japanese want to make the Pacific unsafe. We'll make it impenetrable. Turner taps the table with a pencil. Then we start with 3 changes. Full coastal radar net, continuous patrol aircraft rotations, and mandatory convoys for all high-value shipping. King gestures toward the map. And I want hunter-killer groups at sea, surface ships, aircraft, submarines if necessary. Find I-25. Sink her. End this. Meanwhile, far out to sea, I-25 is still hunting. Hours after the Camden attack, I-25 cruises slowly through deep water. Lieutenant Commander Tegami stands on the bridge, watching distant fog swallow the horizon. He knows the Americans will be furious. He knows they will search for him. He accepts this. But Tegami also knows something they do not. He has 1 torpedo left, 1 more message to send, 1 more blow to strike, 1 more opportunity to shape American strategy. The ocean is calm, silent, deceptive. Tegami descends the ladder into the control room. Set course east by northeast, he orders. His officers look up, startled. That will take us closer to the coast, one warns. Tegami's expression doesn't change. Exactly. He taps the chart once, soft, deliberate. I-25 will strike again before the day is over. The Pacific turns dark behind them. The California shoreline grows closer. The tension grows heavier. The West Coast has awakened to the war. But the war is not done with them yet. The torpedo that changed everything. October 2nd, 1942, off the Oregon-California border pre-dawn darkness. The Pacific is a cold sheet of ink, the horizon swallowed by thick fog. The moon hides behind a blanket of cloud, leaving only the faint glow of phosphorus swirling around I-25's hull as she cuts silently through the swell. Inside the submarine, red emergency lights cast long shadows across the faces of the torpedo crew. Petty Officer Murata places his hand on the remaining Type 95 torpedo, long, silver, perfect. The oxygen-fueled warhead hums faintly, colder than the surrounding air. He whispers a quiet prayer. The boat feels different now, heavier, as if the torpedo itself knows its purpose. In the control room, Lieutenant Commander Tegami rests one hand on the navigation table, his eyes locked on the faint coastal silhouette ahead. How close are we? He asks. The navigator checks his chart, voice low. 21 kilometers from the shoreline, sir. We are almost in firing position. Tegami nods. They all know this is suicide range. Too close, too risky. American patrols are tightening every hour. But this strike, this single shot, could shape the enemy's behavior for months. And Tegami has no intention of leaving without completing his mission. The target appears. As I-25 creeps toward the surface, the fog thins. A faint shimmer appears on the horizon. Through binoculars, Sub-Lieutenant Fujiwara spots it first. Sir, a tanker. American. Large. Tegami moves beside him, taking the binoculars. A lumbering silhouette breaks through the mist. Black hull, tall bow, massive fuel tanks rising from the deck. A merchant tanker heading south. Perfect. Range? Tegami asks sharply. 12 kilometers and closing. Speed? Slow. 10 knots at most. Tegami feels the decision crystallize in his mind. This one will burn, he says. The torpedo crew tenses. This one, Tegami continues, will send the Americans into full coastal panic. On board the American tanker, SS Montebello II, a refitted cargo fuel hybrid vessel, plows southward through the dark, engines humming, bow smashing into slow rollers. Captain Harold Burton stands on the bridge, rubbing his tired eyes. He looks like a man trying to stay awake through a double shift. His first officer steps beside him. Morning fog's thicker than usual. Burton exhales sharply. Fog is the daily reminder we're sailing blind. He scans the waters. Nothing but gray void. Any sign of escorts? The first officer asks. Burton shakes his head. Not until we hit the convoy assembly point. Until then, he gestures at the featureless horizon. We're on our own. He feels a familiar bitterness rise in his throat. The Atlantic gets convoys. The Gulf gets escorts. The West Coast. Nothing. Command insists the submarine threat is limited. Burton has learned not to trust that word. A torpedo leaves the tube. Back on I-25, the torpedo room is silent. Tegami gives the order quietly. Fire. The submarine shudders. A plume of bubbles explodes from the forward tube. The torpedo streaks outward, propelled by compressed oxygen, cutting a perfect white trail through the dark water. The crew listens. 40 seconds. 50. 60. Then, boom. The explosion rattles the hull of I-25 herself. All across the submarine, men cheer, fists raised, faces alive with relief and triumph. The strike is perfect, direct, devastating. Tegami remains silent, watching the growing glow on the horizon. Flames begin to bloom. Dark smoke pours upward. The tanker lists sharply to port. Tegami gives a single nod. It is done. The coast finds out. 16 minutes later, the Oregon coast trembles. Windows rattle in small fishing towns from Brookings to Gold Beach. Dogs bark wildly. People jolt awake, thinking an earthquake has hit. But it's not an earthquake. It's the thunder of a tanker exploding offshore. By sunrise, every patrol station from Astoria to Eureka is receiving frantic reports. Large explosion offshore, possible enemy action. Smoke seen 6 miles out, black column rising. Ship burning, no distress signal received. Hearing survivors calling for help. At Coast Guard Station Crescent City, Ensign Warren Blanchard scrambles out of the barracks and into the cold coastal air. The horizon is lit orange. He grabs binoculars. Dear God, a massive inferno rages at sea, flames licking upward like a volcanic eruption. Blanchard runs for the radios. Get every boat we have, now, and notify the Navy. Washington snaps. Hours later, in Washington, D.C., the shockwave hits. Admiral Ernest King storms into the operations room, slapping the telegram against the nearest desk. Another tanker? He roars. How are they still getting this close? A junior officer clears his throat. Sir, reports say the explosion shook houses on shore. King goes pale. If Japanese submarines can strike close enough to shake U.S. soil, the political fallout will be catastrophic. He turns to his staff. That's it, King snaps. No more half measures. We're locking down the entire West Coast. He points to the operations board. Effective immediately. Mandatory convoys for all coastal shipping. 24/7 air patrols across the Pacific approaches. Full deployment of new long-range radar. Anti-submarine nets around major ports. Escort vessels doubling in number. He slams a fist on the table. This ends today. Meanwhile, at sea, I-25 is gone. By mid-afternoon, the Pacific is empty. I-25 has vanished beneath the waves, diving deep into a labyrinth of cold undercurrents. The Japanese submarine is limping home. Fuel nearly gone, torpedoes spent, crew exhausted but triumphant. They have no idea that their final strike has just rewritten America's entire coastal defense strategy. They only know one thing. Their mission is complete. The torpedo has done more than sink a ship. It has changed the psychology of a nation. The West Coast is no longer a rear area. It is a battlefield, the new wall of the Pacific. October 5th, 1942, Naval Air Station North Bend, Oregon dawn. Cold mist hangs over the massive wooden hangars as Lieutenant Commander Frank Merrill strides across the tarmac. Engines roar around him. PBY Catalinas warming up, pilots shouting to their ground crews, mechanics tightening the last bolts on depth charge racks. Merrill stops beside a Catalina painted in sea gray camouflage. He runs his hand along the cool, wet fuselage. 3 days ago, this station flew spotting missions twice a day. Now, they're launching every 90 minutes, day and night. A young pilot, Ensign Ray Haskins, jogs up to Merrill, goggles bouncing on his helmet. Commander, he says breathlessly, is it true? Orders straight from COMWESDCFRON. Merrill nods. Effective immediately, he recites continuous patrols along the Oregon, Washington, and Northern California coast. Any unidentified wake, periscope, or oil slick is grounds for attack. Haskins exhales sharply. Sir, that's basically telling us to shoot the ocean. Merrill gives him a look, firm, unyielding. If that's what it takes to stop another submarine, he says, then yes. We shoot the ocean. Behind them, the hangar doors rumble open and another Catalina emerges, engines coughing to life. The new wall of the Pacific is not concrete. It is wings. Convoys return to the Pacific. October 6th, 1942, San Francisco Naval Yard. The bay is a forest of masts, funnels, and cranes. Merchant captains crowd the pier, shouting over each other as Navy officers struggle to assign escorts. Captain Louise Martin, one of the few women in the logistical command, points sharply at a line of freighters. No ship sails alone anymore, she says. Not one. You want to move lumber? Coffee? Shell casings? Doesn't matter. If you're headed up or down this coast, you will leave in a convoy. A gray-bearded skipper growls back. We don't have time to wait for escorts. We're losing money. Martin leans in, glaring. Lose a ship instead. You'll lose everything. The argument collapses instantly, because no one has forgotten the inferno off Oregon. The Montebello 2 burned for 7 hours. Survivors describe the Torpedo as a hammer from the deep. Convoys once belonged to the Atlantic fighting U-boats. But now, the Pacific adopts the system in full force. 4 ships per convoy minimum. 2 destroyer escorts. 2 patrol aircraft overhead. Stricter routes far from the shoreline. Mandatory radio silence. The coastline becomes a controlled corridor of warships and aircraft. The West Coast is turning into a fortress. The radar awakening. October 10th, 1942, Mount Tamalpais, radar, station Northern California. A rotating antenna sweeps the damp morning air. The radar hut crackles with static as technicians adjust knobs, scribbling notes on grid paper. Sergeant Daniel Kravitz leans over the console, listening to the rhythmic ping of returning echoes. Signal strength increased by 30%, a technician reports. Surface movement detected 20 miles off Point Reyes. Kravitz steps closer. Enemy. The technician squints. No, sir. Just a fishing boat. Kravitz exhales, but the tension never leaves his shoulders. Radar used to be experimental. Large, finicky, often ignored. Now it is gospel. Every blip matters. Every echo is analyzed. Every anomaly is investigated. Because if a Japanese submarine is creeping toward San Francisco or Seattle, radar is the first and often only warning. As a stiff wind pushes through the station's windows, Kravitz looks out over the fog-soaked Pacific. 3 weeks ago, America thought radar was a luxury. Now is the West Coast's second wall. Hunting shadows. October 12th, 1942, off the Washington coast aboard USS Steinecker. Lieutenant John Greeley grips the rail as the destroyer plows through the choppy surf. A cold wind stings his eyes, and salt spray coats his uniform. The ship's sonar team calls out from below. Contact bearing 122 degrees. Possible submerged target. Greeley's pulse spikes. He signals the helm. Right full rudder. Bring us to intercept. The destroyer shudders as it turns. Depth charges ready, the weapons officer shouts. Greeley doesn't hesitate. Drop pattern now. Explosions rip through the deep. Columns of water rise and fall. The ship trembles violently. But when the smoke clears, the sea is empty. No oil slick. No debris. No metal. Just gray water rolling toward the horizon. False alarm. One of thousands. Greeley slams his palm against the rail in frustration. But he understands the truth. They are not chasing submarines. They are chasing fear. Fear created by one torpedo, one attack, one ruthless demonstration of Japanese reach. And yet, that fear is strengthening the West Coast faster than any admiral could have ordered. The psychology of a nation changes. By late October 1942, the transformation is complete. The West Coast now lives by a new rhythm. Air raid sirens practice at dawn. Patrol bombers roar overhead every hour. Convoy horns echo through the fog. Destroyers prowl the shipping lanes like wolves. Radios track every unknown signal. What once felt like a distant war has now become a daily presence. In the sky, on the water, in the hearts of every coastal city. The Japanese submarine, I-25, did more than sink ships. It shattered the illusion of safety. It forced America to harden its western flank. It created a defensive machine stretching from Alaska to Baja California. But one final impact of that torpedo still waits ahead. One that affects strategy across the entire Pacific War. Lessons learned across the Pacific. October 20th, 1942, Pearl Harbor Naval Base Office of Admiral Chester Nimitz. Rain lashes the windows as Admiral Chester W. Nimitz stands over a massive map table. The ocean is drawn in blue ink, the islands in precise lines, but the pins, red, white, yellow, are never precise enough. Commander Raymond Spruance enters, holding a folder thick with reports. "Admiral," he says, "the West Coast is changing. Fast. Patrol intensity is up. Radar installations doubled. Convoys reintroduced. They're treating the Oregon attack like a second Pearl Harbor." Nimitz nods slowly, tracing a finger along the Pacific coastline. "It wasn't the torpedo itself," he murmurs. "It was what it implied." Spruance opens the folder. Inside are 3 horrifying case studies. USS Wasp, sunk by Japanese submarine I-19. USS O'Brien, hit by the same spread. USS North Carolina, damaged by a follow-up attack. A single Japanese submarine disabled or destroyed 3 American warships in minutes. The math is undeniable. Japanese subs have longer range, Spruance says. Better endurance. Higher cruising speed. They can hit us anywhere. Nimitz's jaw sets. And until recently, they proved it. Spruance adds one final sheet to the table. A newspaper clipping from California. West Coast ship torpedoed again. Civilians demand answers. Nimitz taps the headline. "The American people are waking up," he says. "Now I must wake up with them." He circles 2 areas on the map. Midway, Solomon Islands. "These are where we stop them," he declares. "Not off Oregon. Not near San Diego. We stop them out here, before they get anywhere close." Spruance nods firmly. The shift is clear. Defense is no longer enough. The Pacific must be taken back, mile by mile. Submarine warfare turns against Japan. November 1st, 1942, Brisbane, Australia. USS Gudgeon submarine pen. In the dim submarine dock, diesel fumes swirl in the air as Commander William Logan walks along the deck of his vessel, the USS Gudgeon. He runs a hand along the metal casing, still slick from condensation. For months, American submarines were cautious, targeting carefully, moving slowly. Now, the rules have changed. A junior officer approaches. "Sir, new orders from ComSubPac." Logan unfolds the paper. His eyebrows rise. Unlimited offensive operations. Against Japanese shipping. Along every major island chain. No more patrolling. No more waiting for opportunities. The attack doctrine that once favored Japanese submarines now shifts decisively to the Americans. Logan folds the paper. "Prepare torpedoes 1 through 10, he says. "We sail tonight." The ground crew rushes forward. Because the Americans finally understand. Submarines win wars not with defense, but with strangulation. The aircraft carrier becomes the shield. November 8th, 1942, South Pacific, aboard USS Enterprise. Wind howls across the flight deck as F-4F Wildcats are wheeled into position. Lieutenant Gordon Harper stands beside his aircraft, goggles reflecting the morning glare. "Pilot, your escort flight will cover convoy, Route 7B, a deck officer shouts. "Watch for submarine movement near the channel." Harper climbs into the cockpit. "Submarines," he yells back. "I thought that was the Navy's job." "Not anymore," the officer shouts. "After Oregon, everybody hunts subs." Harper laughs despite the tension. Because it's true. The carriers, once meant to duel enemy fleets, now guard supply lines. Every convoy has air cover. Every air cover includes sub-hunt patrols. Every sub-hunt patrol carries depth charges. The line of defense stretches thousands of miles. What began as a single torpedo in Oregon now shapes the entire American strategy. Every ship, every plane, every patrol works to choke the Japanese advance. The home front adapts too. November 10th, 1942, Los Angeles Coastal Defense Center. Inside an underground bunker, civilian volunteers sit in rows of listening posts, headphones on, scribbling notes. Radar operators track every blip. Radio interceptors monitor Japanese signals. An officer walks the aisle. "This is the new front line," he reminds them. Every fisherman, every merchant ship, every harbor worker, eyes open, ears open. A young woman raises her hand. "Sir, is it really true? A single submarine changed all this?" The officer nods gravely. One torpedo made the United States realize the Pacific isn't distant. It's our doorstep. And with that, The volunteers return to their monitors, listening for whispers of danger on the open sea. A new reality for the entire Pacific War. The lessons learned from Oregon, from the WASP, from the Indianapolis tragedy, and from every torpedo that struck American hulls coalesce into a single, unified doctrine. Control the sea, control the sky, protect the coast, punish the enemy wherever he hides. And now a new question hangs over the Pacific. If one torpedo changed the West Coast defense plan, what will a fleet full of American submarines and carriers change next? The Pacific is shifting. The balance of power is turning. And the United States, once caught off guard, is now very much awake. The submarine war turns against Japan. January 1943. Mid-Pacific. USS Gato, SS 212. 0400 hours, ***. Inside the dim red-lit control room, the air smells of diesel, sweat, and war metal. Commander Richard Dick O'Kane leans over the chart table, tapping a pencil against a hand-drawn Japanese shipping lane. Convoys are tightening, he mutters. They're learning. Lieutenant Bill Dempsey shakes his head. Not fast enough. They're still sailing without destroyer cover in some lanes. O'Kane folds his arms, eyes narrowing. Then we remind them why that's a mistake. He turns to the helmsman. All ahead 1/3. Come to course 270. The submarine pivots silently, slicing through the black Pacific like a steel predator. A year ago, American submarines hunted timidly. Now, they hunt with purpose. Because Washington has finally embraced the strategy that Japanese commanders feared most. A full, unrestricted submarine campaign against Japan's lifeline. Japan's nightmare becomes reality. January 6, 1943, Tokyo Naval General Staff Headquarters. Admiral Shigetaro Shimada stands before a wall-sized map of the Pacific. Red pins mark Japanese convoys. Blue pins mark American submarines. There are too many blue pins. A young officer enters with a report. Admiral, another merchant ship sunk off truck. He hesitates. And another off Formosa. And Shimada doesn't let him finish. Just give me the total. The officer swallows. 8 ships in 10 days. Shimada exhales slowly. 8 ships may not seem like much compared to tank battles or carrier clashes. But Japan's entire empire depends on those ships. Food from Korea, oil from the Dutch East Indies, steel from Manchuria, troops from anywhere they can be spared. Lose the ships, lose the war. He presses a fist into the table. How many submarines do the Americans have on patrol now? The officer shakes his head. We don't know, sir. That answer chills the room. Once, Japanese submarines were the hunters. Now, without ever making a declaration, the Americans have reversed the tide. The hunter becomes the hunted. Back in the Pacific, the trap is set. January 11th, 1943, south of Truk Lagoon, USS Gato. Contact. Merchant vessel bearing 080. The excitement in the sonar operator's voice electrifies the control room. Commander O'Kane slides beside him. Range, 5,000 yards. Single contact. No escort. O'Kane's eyes flick toward the periscope. His voice drops into a predator's whisper. Surface the boat. We'll take this one on the surface. Within seconds, the submarine breaks through the waves. Cold salt water sprays across the deck as crewmen spill out, racing to the deck guns. The Gato charges forward, silent but fast. O'Kane lifts the binoculars. A lone Japanese freighter crawls across the horizon, black smoke rising from its stack. He lowers the glasses. Guns. The order cracks like a whip. The deck gun roars. Tracer fire streaks across the water. Shells slam into the freighter's hull, ripping open metal. The Japanese ship burns within minutes. A clean, decisive kill. One ship, one blow, one more cut in Japan's already fraying supply arteries. The shift becomes a strategy. January 20th, 1943, Pearl Harbor Submarine Command Headquarters. Admiral Bull Lockwood stands before his assembled officers. He doesn't shout. He doesn't pace. He simply points at a single line on a chalkboard. Sink everything Japan floats. The room falls silent. This is no longer coastal defense. This is no longer reaction. This is a full-scale naval strangulation. Lockwood continues. The Japanese Navy is overstretched. Their escorts are inadequate. Their convoys disorganized. We will cut off their breath. We will starve their army. We will isolate their islands until they cannot move. He stabs a finger toward the map. You will engage at every opportunity. Every ship is a target. Every route is open season. And then he says the line every man in the room will remember. Our submarines will do to Japan what theirs tried and failed to do to us. The officers exchange looks. It's bold. It's brutal. It's necessary. The Japanese response, too little, too late. February 1943, Rabaul Naval Air Station. A Japanese officer inspects a row of battered submarines. Paint scorched. Torpedoes depleted. Crews exhausted. One commander stands at attention, face gaunt. Sir, we request more fuel. The officer shakes his head. There is none. More spare parts? None. Replacement torpedoes. The officer's silence answers the question. While the Japanese submarine fleet withers, the American fleet grows stronger every month. Fuel, torpedoes, radar, training, intelligence. Everything Japan is losing, America is gaining. This imbalance, born from a single lesson off the Oregon coast, now shapes an entire war. Return to the USS Gato. February 17, 1943, Philippine Sea. O'Kane stands at the periscope. Convoy spotted, he says calmly. 5 ships, 1 small escort. His smile is thin, focused. Arm the forward tubes. Stand by. Below him, sailors move with purpose. Not hunger, not desperation, but confidence. Aye, sir. Tubes 1 through 4 ready. O'Kane inhales. Fire 1. A torpedo streaks into the dark. Fire 2. Another. Fire 3. Another. Fire 4. The submarine trembles with each release. Moments later, for explosions thunder across the sea. A freighter breaks in half. A tanker erupts into flame. The escort scrambles in panic. O'Kane watches, grim but steady. Somewhere, he thinks, a Japanese admiral is feeling the consequences of Oregon, of WASP, of every torpedo fired at American shores. Now the Americans fire back, and they will not stop. The numbers don't lie. By the end of 1943, Japan has lost 1/3 of its merchant fleet. American submarines sink over 1,300,000 tons of shipping in 1 year. Fuel shortages cripple Japanese island bases. Troops starve on bypassed garrisons. Convoys dwindle from fleets to trickles. What began as a defensive panic after I-25's Oregon attacks has evolved into one of the most destructive submarine campaigns in world history. And Japan never recovers. The final consequence: how one torpedo helped collapse Japan's empire. April 1944. Rabaul, New Britain. Japanese Army Logistics Quartermaster Depot, ***. The depot is almost empty. The warehouses that once thundered with crates of rice, fuel drums, and ammunition now echo with footsteps and faraway voices. A quartermaster officer named Captain Morita walks past stacks of rotting burlap sacks and rusting fuel cans. He stops in the center of the room. His clipboard lists supplies for an entire division. His shelves hold supplies for a single regiment. Morita closes his eyes, steadying himself, not because of fear, but because he knows the truth. The ships aren't coming. They can't. They've been sunk. A sergeant rushes in. Sir, the garrison on Bougainville reports they're down to quarter rations. Morita doesn't look up. What do they expect me to do? Magic rice out of the air? The sergeant swallows hard. They're asking if we can send at least dried fish or beans. Morita slams the clipboard onto the table. There are no beans. There is no fish. There is nothing. He points toward the harbor, where a single battered freighter lists at anchor, so riddled with holes it looks like a floating colander. This is what happens, Morita mutters, when every convoy gets hit, when every supply lane bleeds, when the enemy owns the ocean. He doesn't say the rest. He doesn't have to. Japan's empire is starving. Not because America conquered islands, but because America controlled the sea beneath them. Back in the U.S., the strategy evolves. June 1944. Pearl Harbor. Pacific Fleet Submarine Command. Admiral Lockwood stands over a large wooden table covered in charts, pins, and handwritten notes. Each pin marks a Japanese ship lost. The board is so crowded that officers have begun pinning new markers along the border just to make room. O'Kane enters the office, saluting sharply. Lockwood grins. "Dick, you're sinking ships faster than I can print reports." O'Kane cracks a tired smile. "Admiral, they're making it easy for us. No zigzags. No escorts. It's almost unfair." Lockwood chuckles. "It is unfair. It's supposed to be." He points at the board. "You see this? This isn't just submarine work. This is strategy. This is pressure. This is America's industrial weight crushing an empire that never truly understood what a submarine campaign could do." He leans closer. "And it all began when a Japanese captain thought torpedoing a lumber ship off Oregon would rattle us." O'Kane nods slowly. "It did more than rattle. It woke us up." Lockwood's smile fades into a grim line. "And once we woke up, Japan never caught up." Japan's last desperate convoys. Late 1944. Philippine Sea. Convoy MI 27. Night. Black sky. Black seas. Black silhouettes of ships moving in a tight, desperate cluster. Convoy MI 27 carries everything Japan needs. Ammunition, fuel, medicine, rice. 7 merchant ships, escorted by 2 under-equipped destroyers low on fuel. The convoy commander, Captain Tanaka, scans the horizon with binoculars. "Keep formation tight," he orders. American subs strike in packs. One destroyer officer mutters, "Sir, if we take one torpedo, our boilers won't survive." Tanaka doesn't respond. He knows the truth. They are not sailing for victory. They're sailing for survival. At 0200 hours, sonar pings. A faint, unmistakable sound. A propeller. Then 3. Then 6. Tanaka lowers his binoculars, jaw tightening. American wolf pack. Moments later, 3 submarines rise like ghosts from below. USS Celian. USS Growler. USS Palau. Red lights flash inside the submarines. Commands echo in cramped control rooms. Flood tubes. Set depth. Fire 1. Fire 2. Fire 3. The ocean erupts. A freighter buckles in half. Another detonates as fuel ignites. A destroyer veers hard starboard, but a torpedo slams into her bow, ripping it apart. Tanaka grabs the railing. His eyes widen as the convoy disintegrates around him. "This," he whispers, voice shaking, "this is how we die. Not by battleships, not by air raids, not by Marines storming beaches, but by the silent hunters America sent into the deep." Starvation as a weapon. By 1945, the consequences are unavoidable. 60% of Japan's merchant fleet is destroyed. Millions of tons of food never reach the islands. Fuel shortages cripple the remaining navy. Garrisons across the Pacific starve to death without firing a shot. Factories sit idle because coal ships never arrive. Japanese soldiers on isolated islands begin eating bark, insects, even grass. Some survive by raiding abandoned Allied food dumps. The empire collapses inward, not from military defeat, but from logistical suffocation, a strangulation that began with one submarine firing one torpedo off the American coast. The West Coast lesson comes full circle. August 1945, San Francisco Naval Command. The war is ending. Admiral Chester Nimitz stands at a wide window overlooking the Golden Gate. Below him, destroyers glide through the water, returning from escort duty, convoys that once guarded the coast after I-25's attack 3 years earlier. Behind him, a young lieutenant enters with a report. "Sir, the Japanese merchant fleet is effectively gone. Less than 10% remains operational." Nimitz nods. "It was always about supply," he murmurs. "Always." He taps a file on his desk. Inside are the original orders from 1942. The frantic scramble after a single Japanese torpedo hit the lumber ship Coos Bay off Oregon. Funny, the lieutenant says quietly. One attack convinces us to protect our coast. But their attacks. He trails off. Nimitz finishes the thought. Convinced us to take the sea away from them. He turns back to the window. War isn't won by who fires first. It's won by who learns fastest. The true consequence. Japan believed a submarine attack on America's coast would frighten the United States. It did more than frighten. It provoked the most relentless, devastating submarine campaign in human history. The attack on Oregon. The sinking of Wasp. The destruction of Indianapolis. Each incident sharpened American resolve. Each pushed the U.S. to strengthen the West Coast. Each expanded the submarine force. Each tightened the noose. By the end of the war, America's submarine fleet, just 2% of the Navy, sank over 55% of all Japanese ships lost. And Japan's empire, once sprawling across the Pacific, collapsed without enough ships to feed itself.